There have been some substantive outcomes from the Prime Minister's state visit to the United States. Does this also mean that India and the United States, the reflection from these outcomes, that they are taking each other in a tighter embrace? Let's try and understand what it means for the future of the relationship. We have with us ORF America's Dhruv Jaishankar. Many thanks for speaking with NDTV. The GE-HAL deal, I'll start with that, has been described as a landmark deal. In the joint statement, the Prime Minister said the same. Is it landmark only in terms of the fact that there will be a technology transfer and it shows a massive shift in the relationship, defense cooperation? Or does it give you a larger picture of where the relationship is headed?
I mean, a little bit of both. It is, I think, quite symbolically significant, but I think the real significance is that jet engine technology is really one of the most highly sought after. It's a very cutting edge, very highly technical suite of technologies actually. And it is one area, for example, where even China has had trouble challenging the United States. One of the few areas where China has trouble challenging the United States, despite a significant amount of resources thrown towards jet engine technology. So I think that is really why this deal in particular is significant. And again, beyond a sort of empty promise, we now actually have a commercial deal between two entities that has apparently been agreed to. We'll now have to see that implemented, of course. So there's still many steps. But the other element, I think, which is quite significant is this should and could have a catalyzing effect, which is India's going to be one of the largest civilian aerospace sectors, the fastest growing aviation sectors in the next decade or two. We've seen major deals on that. So India is now being integrated into a global aviation industrial supply chain network. That I think is quite significant, and it will have larger, again, catalytic effects for the defense industrial base in India. So taken together, this symbol, again, it's partly symbolic, but the real world outcomes could be quite significant.
Since you mentioned China, we'll take a look now at the cooperation in the tech sector. Many people believe that it is largely because of China, and I think President Biden has also pretty much indicated the same. Do you think that the move by India and America to counter China, especially on in sectors like semiconductors, AI is another field that they are looking at. Do you think that will be effective, and how soon can that be effective in the Indo-Pacific space?
So, I think the technological space is very wide and again has many broader secondary implications as well. So it's very hard to say whether it will be successful. My suspicion is it will be more successful in certain areas and less successful in some areas where there are relative strengths and capabilities, where the US, India, China each enjoy certain strengths. So I would look at it more on a issue by issue or sector by sector basis. The concerns, I think, are a few-fold. It is not simply driven by security, although that is a factor. India, after all, banned a suite of Chinese apps immediately after the clashes that left 20 Indian soldiers killed in Galwan. And the US is considering, as strategic competition with China heats up, US is considering similar measures. So there is obviously a strategic element to it. But some of it is also, I think, driven by the experience of the pandemic and the realization that any country concentrating supply chains in critical technologies and critical manufacturing spaces leads to insecurity, technological and economic insecurity on the part of an India or a US. So it will hurt average Indian people if one country is able to monopolize a critical supply chain like that. And so I think what the US and India are doing partly is driven by strategic competition with China, but partly also simply by understanding that no country should have a monopoly on some of these technologies, and for their own self-interest they need to ensure a degree of diversity so as to have resilience in their supply chain systems.
I want to shift to the issue of visas now. The fact sheet by the US mentions that H-1B visas now can be renewed in the US and they don't need to travel to India or a third country, the techies especially. So do you see it as a welcome step from the Indian perspective also? Of course, it will help the professionals, but on a larger ambit, there are many aspects to visa issues, and it's not just professionals, because of course America needs those professionals, so they are easing things out. Overall, how do you see the picture of visas?
So, I think there's 3 or 4 ways of looking at it. The specific announcement here, I think, is quite modest. It is next year starting a pilot program to ensure H-1B and L visa holders can get reissued in country without having to travel back to their home countries. That will affect a very small number of people. It's a pilot program. It will start next year. So I think it's a modest, well-meaning but modest step. Most significant, I think, is opening up consulates. So the US is committed to opening up consulates in Bengaluru and in Ahmedabad. India in Seattle, which had been agreed to previously, and 2 other cities yet to be determined. And I think that is in some ways over the longer run will be more significant, widening consular access. There's a larger issue though, which is the US visa regime, I think, has been stuck, and it requires a larger rehaul, and that hasn't been able to happen for a number of political reasons. It's a very politically sensitive issue here, and it's not out of, another problem was a procedural problem, which is because of the pandemic. There was a shortage in the US ability to process visas got closed, and that was a revenue generator. As a result of that, they were not able to actually rehire people to process those visas, which led to an immense backlog in India. Now, I've seen a lot of commentary in India particularly that this was some deliberate policy on the part of the US. I think that's complete nonsense. I think a lot of people have been working very hard to try and overcome that, but there were these bureaucratic and procedural hurdles in trying to ramp that back up after the pandemic. This, of course, hurt a lot of people, including Indians who were working here. People could not travel back and forth. There still is a backlog, but I think there have been some genuine attempts at trying to remedy that, and hopefully that will be remedied by the end of this year.
There's a lot of stress that India places on taking any relationship, bilateral relationship, from a buyer-seller sort of an equation to something better where India can make in India. Now, in this visit, we have at least 2 buyer-seller equations. One is the drones, which India is buying, and one which is a deal that has been done but mentioned again by President Biden, that of the Boeings. That's also Air India is just buying it. Do you see that the equation of buyer-seller relationship as one that is very hard to let go of for a country like India quickly?
So actually, I think both those deals are not strictly, they're mostly a buyer-seller relationship, you're right, but they're not entirely so. At least in the joint statement on the drone deal, it said that the drones would be assembled in India, which means that there'll be some partial. The challenge there, and with many defense articles, is you don't often have the economies of scale. If you're buying 30 of something, it doesn't make sense to set up an entire factory and an entire ecosystem to manufacture just 30. If you're buying 100 or 200 and including exports to other markets, then it makes more sense. So the economies of scale kick in. So I think that has been often one challenge for, it doesn't make commercial sense for India to buy 5 of or any country to buy 5 of a very expensive item and expect all the manufacturing to take place in India. With the Boeing, I think just because of the need, the urgency of the order, I think there is a large it appears to be a large purchase off the shelf. But if you see, Boeing is also slowly, and has been doing it for some time and is likely to continue doing this, more and more of their maintenance facilities, the logistics, the component manufacturing is taking place in India. And deals like this help in pushing that forward. I think there have been some further commitments both in the civil and the military space on that. So I think it will not simply be that old day where you just buy this off the shelf and there is no local benefit. I think that those days are over.
So my final question to you is that do you see this visit having been more successful on the trade and from the trade and economic point of view, or in the geopolitical space?
I mean, both. I mean, I would actually say there are 4 broad themes to this. One is the strategic convergence, including in the defense sector, including on global issues. And I think there are a number of, again, very substantive outcomes on that. Some benefit India more, some benefit the US more, but that have emerged from that. Including, I was a bit surprised actually to see the US commitment to include India in certain international organizations, the International Energy Agency, the invite to APEC, in the APEC summit later this year. So that I think is the US has been including IPOI, the Indian-led initiative. So that is, I think, one set of issues. Second, on the commercial side, broadly, and I think we had, again, in contrast to nice words, we had some actual deals that were concluded in the last few months and weeks. The third, I think, is technology and a broader technological convergence, including at the R&D level. And the fourth, I would say, is the people-to-people connect, which is, again, actual scholarships, increasing visa access, educational opportunities, and so forth. So I think that if you take in, those would be in my 4 big themes from the visit.
All right. Thank you very much for speaking with NDTV.